Let's bring him on. Tom Rinaldi. Love Tom Rinaldi. How are you, my friend? I love having you on the show a couple times. They told me I had you as a guest today. I was giddy. I couldn't sleep. I was so happy.
Great to be with you, Joy. Always great to see you.
Hi, Tom.
Greatest shirt I've seen this year.
Oh, thank you.
Love the colors.
Thank you.
Outstanding, as usual.
So thanks for tolerating my 6-minute rant on disruption. I appreciate that.
Not at all. I love it.
Okay, so you are doing a documentary, a podcast documentary, and it's an 8-part podcast. It's called Wesley. So you're saying to yourself, Wesley Matthews, Wesley, what is that? So when I first heard the word, I said, what is it? And then I find out that's the middle name of Lyman Bostock. So like many Americans in the 70s, I was a massive baseball fan. We didn't have cable that I knew of. I watched baseball. I can remember the opening on NBC Game of the Week. Right. Baseball was a centerpiece of my life. My first job in broadcasting was baseball. And I remember these teams. I remember Rod Carew and Butch Weiniger and Larry Heisel. I know, it's weird. But I remember Lyman Bostock.
Do you?
He was a great hitter. There was an argument to be made that Rod Carew and Lyman Bostock for a 2-year period were the two best hitters in baseball. Carew was. But I remember him getting murdered, and I was a little kid. I couldn't contextualize it. But I remember the picture of a car. Take it from there. What do I remember?
You're exactly right, Lyman. It's incredible to think about that, Colin, that's the picture that comes to mind, because that picture lodged in your mind is accurate. The only player, active player in the more than 150-year history of Major League Baseball to be murdered during a season. And this isn't ancient history. It isn't a story from a century ago. It's from 1978. I realize that's not immediate, but it's also not terribly distant either. And the reason that picture's in your mind is because Lyman Bostock was riding in his uncle's car, Tom Turner, in Gary, Indiana, where he had spent a part of his childhood and where he would go back to after playing games in Chicago to spend time with his aunts, uncles, and cousins, his extended family there. He was giving a ride along with his uncle to 2 women who wanted to be dropped off across Gary on Lyman's way back to Chicago to finish a visiting series against the White Sox. And an enraged, jealous, and estranged husband of one of the women, a woman who he had read to as a child while he lived in Gary, Lyman. Absolutely nothing going on between them romantically, nothing untoward at all. That estranged husband pulled up at a red light on a Saturday night in Gary, fired 1 shot through the backseat opera window, if you remember cars of that era.
Yep, that's the picture I remember.
Aiming at his wife. But he shot Lyman. And very early the next morning, Lyman Bostock, who had finished second in the American League in hitting, a career .311 hitter.
336.
Awesome, amazing. Now, listen, he was 50 points behind Carew in one of the great seasons of all time, but on the absolute cusp of stardom. And I ask Joy, if this were to happen today.
Oh, you can't. There's nothing to compare. It'd be unbelievable. So did they know immediately? How long did it take until they discovered who did it?
Immediately. His wife identified him. Tom Turner, the uncle, identified him. Hours later, maybe 5 hours later, Gary police detectives went 6 blocks away to the apartment where Leonard Smith, the killer, lived. Arrested him, and as one of the detectives recounts, pardon the language, that it was all about that. That's what Leonard Smith had said. But really, what we want people to know here, Colin, is there's so much more to Lyman Bostock than how he died.
Well, was he politically active? Okay, because I remember that he was from the South
originally.
Okay, so does any of that stuff, is that addressed in? Because when I heard you were coming on, I'm like, was it a political thing? Did his political activism, and I don't remember a ton of athletes, especially baseball players, being politically active, was it front and center? Was it discussed? Was it known about him?
It was a key part of his background. He is born in the South, lives in Gary for a period of time, comes out $7 in his mother's pocket on a Greyhound bus to come to L.A. for a better life, can't make it up, outstanding baseball player in high school, goes to what's then San Fernando Valley State College, which is now Cal State Northridge, on a baseball scholarship, $75 scholarship, by the way. Doesn't see the field for the first 2 years because he's involved in student protest in 1968.
Wow.
He's part of the takeover of the of the administration building after a white coach, assaults a black player, a football player. Lyman, as a fellow athlete, is involved in this protest, ultimately finds himself arrested, facing felony charges, being pressured in all kinds of ways not to return to baseball. But he ignores that. He finds his way onto the field, has a terrific collegiate career, and ultimately flies through the minors to make his way to the majors. All of these fascinating parts are what we describe and talk about through the Chorus of Voices in this first ever episodic podcast that Fox Sports has ever done.
Yeah, back in the 70s, I can remember on a daily basis in my newspaper, you would read batting averages, home runs. I mean, that was what we did as kids.
The agate page, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that was Lyman Bostock and Rod Carew. Carew was the best hitter in baseball. He was like the Ted Williams or the Tony Gwynn. He's the best pure hitter. He had that like little weird stance. And then there was Larry Heisel and Bostock. And the Twins, played in cold weather, but they were really kind of a fascinating team. It was one of the great collections for them in the history of their franchise was back in the 70s. And all of a sudden, the guy is murdered.
And they had ownership, which was penurious, to put it generously. They didn't pay. So Lyman, who'd made $20,000 a season his first 3 seasons, $20,000 for a season when you finish second in the American League, he leaves. He gets one of the biggest contracts in all of sport playing for the then California Angels. He has a terrible slump after signing the contract his first month. He goes to the owner, Gene Autry at the time, the singing cowboy, and says, "I haven't earned my salary, don't pay me." Autry says, "If you hit a home run every game the rest of the season, Lyman, we're not going to pay you any more. Take the salary." He does and donates every dollar to charity. $50,000 when he'd never made more than $20,000 in a season. Yet another episode which draws almost no analog or comparison for us. That's Lyman Wesley Bostock.
So it's an 8-part
episodic podcast.
Who do you talk to in this? Is Rod Carew?
Rod Carew, George Brett, Carney Lansford. Carney Lansford took Lyman Bostock's place, Colin, in the batting lineup. Incredibly, the Angels played the same day that Lyman died. Think about that. That would never happen now. Yeah. Lansford takes his place, can't make it up. First at bat, home run. Runs around the bases with tears falling out of his eyes and breaks down as he recounts that memory in the podcast. All parts, and we haven't even gotten into what happens to the killer, Leonard Smith.
Let's get into that.
And how he goes free, incredibly, after a second trial. He goes free. He's found not guilty by reason of insanity. We tell that whole story as we get into sort of the true crime dynamics of Lyman's, the aftermath of Lyman's death.
That is a fascinating story. Who gave you the heads up on it?
We did the story 14 years ago in a much more limited way at ESPN. We did it as an Outside the Lines feature, but there was so much more to Lyman that we weren't able to get into. And I encountered Leonard Smith. 30 years I found him after he'd shot Lyman, living in the same place 6 blocks down the same street from where he'd killed Bostock.
Now, if it's reason of insanity, he's out living amongst us.
Totally.
Was he, when you met him, was he of right mind, sane?
A big part of the podcast in its later episodes is me revisiting that encounter and how it's been a regret of mine in my career for the last 14 years because I botched it. I botched that encounter. The only time I ever had with Leonard Smith, the man who killed Lyman.
Yeah. Wonder why we haven't told the story. It feels bigger. As you tell the story, I think that's fascinating. I can't believe we haven't told the story in its proper length before. Do Is it because it's macabre? Because, I mean, we talk about activism. We love stories. I mean, we're living in a streaming world where all Netflix does is true crime.
And in so many ways, anyone who went through 1968, the late 1960s, can certainly relate to the early years of this decade, of the 2020s, and the tumult and chaos and unrest, how voices of people of color, the activism from athletes, all these things which resonate so much right now in terms of the quest for social justice and equality and inclusion. So much of Lyman's story resonates, and what the world lost when at 27, one man fired one shot and took his life, a story which is remarkably overlooked.
You've covered, I want to pivot now, you've covered so many different things. All-Star Game tonight, you have an interview with Aaron Judge. I was talking, who did we have on yesterday? Who was the baseball person we had? Smoltz. Joe Davis, and Dodgers voice, talented kid. And I said, there's a Paul Bunyan quality to Aaron Judge. He's so big that despite his injury history, you almost have to sign him. Like, he feels like a Yankee, right? But there's some real injury concerns. The market's now exploding. They couldn't work it out. He's got 1 year left. He's got half a season left. They couldn't work it out. Is he bitter? You interviewed him. Is he resentful? How did it land for him?
Well, when at the end of the interview, I suggested whether it's his characterization or others that he bet on himself, Colin, he gave a smile and sort of said, hey, I quipped and said, how's that working out for you? And he gave a smile and said, listen, to be on the best team in baseball right now at the break, and I think it's working out pretty well. Though one of the things we hope people do pay attention to in the interview, I've asked this question to many athletes over the course of my career. What piece of criticism has motivated you? And he sort of brushed that off for a moment.
That's
I said, but if there is one, he paused and said, I'll go back to high school. And he tells a remarkable story of going to a week-long baseball camp, Colin, and the report card that he was given at the conclusion of camp, and how he still has that report card now, where, among other things, he was rated a 4 or 5 as a hitter.
And he's still bothered by it. Isn't it great? So after the home run derby last night, ESPN aired the Jeter doc.
Yep.
And I said, they always tell you with your kids, don't compare your kids. Everybody wants to compare. Everybody's overrated or underrated. And I argue that Jeter is what a lot of people are, like Tom Cruise or Denzel Washington. He's appropriately rated. He's cool. He's a Hall of Famer. In the most pressurized situation in baseball, he was often better than he was in regular season games. Kershaw hasn't been, Bonds, A-Rod, really hard to do because golf and baseball have long stretches of inactivity. So the sports get into your head. We've seen golfers and baseball players cave because you can sit and ponder and reflect. Basketball player, take another shot. Tom, another snap. Boxer, another round. When I say Jeter to you, you have so many memories, and I have said this before. I've lived all over the country. I do miss the falls in the Northeast. The principled nature of it, the history, the churches, baseball, the tradition, the weather. When I say Jeter to you, is there a memory or two that sticks out to you as a performer, as a single playboy, as the great Yankee shortstop? What sticks out to you?
I think two things. The flip will forever be. I was there covering that game incredibly for
A's.
CNN Sports Illustrated, yes, in the A's stadium. The flip, which was just, again, you stated it perfectly, better when it mattered more and best when it mattered most. That's Derek Jeter. And the other is, of course, how does he get the seminal hit of his career? He hits a home run, right, for 3,000. I mean, it's an incredible, incredible career. And the grace with which he handled the scrutiny and the spotlight of the New York stage, you can make the case is unequaled.
Well, I would say that the Manning family's American football royalty, they're all really bright. Cooper, Eli, Archie, Peyton. That Manning looked at Jeter as sort of a archetype or archetype that's how you handle the New York press.
That's the template.
That's how you do it. I think Eli and Derek Jeter in my lifetime, and maybe Brady in New England, have deflected any controversy. I mean, for God's sakes, Brady had a MAGA hat behind him. It's like, don't characterize our relationship. We just golf. Jeter may be the best I've ever seen at it.
He is, and you said it really well, the art of deflection, because he saw it as distraction. And I'm not going to let anything become a distraction. Even though toward the very end of his career now, remember, and I'm sure they'll visit this powerfully in the series, it was distracting at the end, the relationship with Cashman and how ultimately that unfolded and some of the turbulence there. It'll be interesting to see how open Jeter is about that.
So Clayton Kershaw, once again, very good. Dodger Stadium tonight. Kershaw could be compared, some say, favorably to Sandy Koufax as one of the great left-handers, although Kershaw's career, Sandy's was very brief. Clayton, maybe not as spectacular in that brief time capsule, is a much bigger, larger profile and resume. He's a fascinating guy. He's all about winning. I remember when Yasiel Puig was in the locker room, he had no time for nonsense. I mean, does he compare? Is he a prototype for somebody? I don't know him. I've met him before. The story of he and Stafford High School, well documented. What is Kershaw to you in baseball history? Can
I tell you something that I really thought stuck out just of the moment right now? Clayton Kershaw, in some ways, that intensity is like an armor. And it's a repellent, if you will, right? That intensity keeps people away. That he's a star in the real sense. We really don't get to know him that well. And yet, when he talked about what it meant to him to be the all-star starter, there was a different glint in his eye and tone in his voice. How much it means to him to be able to start this game in his home stadium as he gets toward the backstretch of his career. And that voice not only carries across the country, that voice carries in the clubhouse in a game where some people suggest it doesn't mean as much as it should. To hear Clayton Kershaw talk about it that way really resonated with me, and I think will resonate with players.
Okay, we've got a podcast series, 8-part podcast, Fox Sports. First 4 episodes are out now. It's called Wesley on Lyman Bostock, a tragic murder in the middle of a season.
At the end of the 78 season, yes.
Yeah, which has never happened in the history of baseball. It feels like a very layered story. When you had done it the first time, and then you said you came back to it, was there something that surprised you the second time around that you just simply didn't know?
Oh, so many things, Colin, in particular about what happened to his life in college when he is arrested, when he is cut from the team, when it looks like his baseball career is over before it even begins. And then some of the things that happen with the Twins, what happens in his life as an Angel, so many dynamics, as well as what happens regarding not the one, but the 2 trials that Leonard Smith goes through, and how ultimately that verdict changed the law in the state of Indiana and many other states across the country. That's a part of Lyman's legacy as well, that not guilty by reason of insanity no longer led to freedom if someone was no longer judged to be mentally defective or ill, but they would be remanded back into custody. It used to be that you went free.
You know, Rinaldi, I could do when someday when Joy retires. How about Cowherd, Rinaldi, and Friends? We'll do a morning show and just talk. I could talk to you forever. I think you're a fascinating guy. You're an adult in the room, and you have tolerated me for years. I love everything about you coming to Fox. Nothing against the other team. Fine team. Missing some real talent now, but a fine team over there. We love having you. The All-Star game. Is it 7 o'clock tonight? Is that what the starting time is?
Correct.
You've got your Aaron Judge interview, and I like having you out west. You know what? Have you noticed this? You lost a few pounds out here. More avocado.
I'm still out east. I'm still Jersey pride and strong, but I love coming out west. I understand.
Great seeing you, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.